This panel will explore how artificial intelligence is transforming the GEOINT mission, from autonomous data processing to real-time decision support. They'll share insights on operationalizing AI, managing ethical risk, and accelerating mission outcomes through automation. The panelists are Usher, Co-Chief Executive Officer at Black Cape; Nadine Alameh, Executive Director of the Taylor Geospatial Institute; Taegyun Jeon, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of SI Analytics; Don Polaski, Vice President of AI for Intel at Booz Allen Hamilton. Moderating today's discussion will be Sanjay Kumar, the Chief Executive Officer of Geospatial World. Sanjay has been facilitating and accelerating the growth of the geospatial industry worldwide and raising awareness of the industry's value proposition. As Chief Executive at Geospatial Media and Communications, he has been responsible for its transformation into a leading media organization that makes a difference through geospatial knowledge and advocacy. He also holds important leadership roles across the geospatial community, including on the board of the Open Geospatial Consortium since 2011 and chairing the United Nations GEINT Private Sector Network. So please join me in warmly welcoming Sanjay and the panelists to the stage.
Well, I'm Sanjay Kumar, and what I think about today's topic is, of course, I have a host of panelists who will do a great job, and they are the experts. You know, the role of a moderator is just to moderate. But what I thought is, when I was standing behind the screen, that the theme is Next-Gen GEOINT. And I am from Geospatial World, and we're talking of AI for GEOINT. So what is common between the two, AI and GI? So if we break down geospatial intelligence, it is GI, and artificial intelligence is AI. The common is intelligence, and what is the bridging factor is geospatial is all about physical, which you see is real. You just go out and go in, and you see the geospatial dimensions. And artificial is more about digital. So when you look at combination of physical to digital, or today people call about phygital, and that's where we get into the digital twin enterprises. And another word which actually strikes to me very appealing is a term known as spatial computing. Spatial computing, if you search, you'll find statements by Jensen Huang or Tim Cook or all the big tech company leaders. And what do they mean by it simply is the entire computing is into 3-dimension now, which means 3-dimension is geospatial. But when you bring that into the form of spatial computing, it means that your computing world is going 3-dimension. And in that context, the theme of the discussion is very, very relevant. We have 4 very great experts on this topic to discuss about. We'll have a couple of rounds of discussion, and we'll start with the kind of opening remarks just to kind of trigger it. But let's see what is each of these panelists have a very unique perspective to share. So like when I was talking to Usher, the CEO of Cape, and what he talks about is a very creative ways of AI impact. So, Abe, what do you think about AI impact, and what are the creative ways of making or enhancing the AI impact?
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. So just very quickly, my background in technology started a number of years ago when I was an engineer at Google working on Google Maps. So I have a passion for search and geospatial data. But I think, one thing where people don't think creatively is sometimes they use generative AI like a Google search, and they're just looking for a specific answer. I think a much more impactful way to use generative AI is to consider it a thought partner. And instead of just asking for a question, invite it to help you with your thinking. So many of you know a guy named Pat Bilchin, who is an analytic methodologist, somewhat famous in this community. I will often put an LLM in what I call Pat Bilchin mode. And I will use a prompt something like this: act as my thought partner and advisor. Here's my approach to solving a problem. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Give me 3 questions of clarification about my methodology and recommend an even better way for solving this problem. And what I found is something as simple as that can often help me team with AI as a thought companion to get to a better result very quickly.
So it's not a search, it's a team. It's a team player, right?
Team.
So taking forward this conversation, you started from that you have a background of working with companies like Google and all these big tech companies. Nadine, what do you think about the deep tech or big companies, their focus on AI? Everybody's on the AI, so what's in it?
Yeah, thank you, Sanjay, and thank you, Rhonda, and the USGIF team for hosting us this week. So Sanjay, I am fascinated by what's happening in the geo AI, and more specifically how we're lowering the barrier for everybody to be able to finally use our geo data and tools. And I'll mention just very quickly 3 amazing examples that are gonna, it's not enhance, they're gonna fundamentally shift how we do things. Microsoft, teaming up with NASA to create the Earth Copilot, so you can actually ask the Earth, what's the impact of this hurricane on my region, on my neighborhood? Transformational. IBM teaming up with the European Space Agency on, again, multimodal Earth model, yes, and in this case, it's not only, by the way, open source, Sanjay, so when we're talking tech and I think global collaborations, it's also, they have 9 different types of EO data, and I love that they can then generate their own training data across modes, right? So if you have hydro data, you can supplement transportation data, etc. And the last one, which I think rocked everybody 2-3 weeks ago, did you hear about Google geospatial reasoning? Right? So they started with population forecasting and trajectory-based mobility, and now they're onto Earth observation. All of this will become part of the platforms, right? We had the cloud and HPC and GPU, and now entire platforms ready for us to build on. So
in a way, AI is powering the big tech companies' platforms, but then GeoINT or Geospatial is inside.
Yes.
So, my next panelist is Taegyun.
Taegyun, yeah.
And, when taking the conversation forward from, Nadine is the fact that these platforms, and there's a Geospatial inside. So what do you think about Geospatial foundation models which can actually power AI?
Yeah, you already know the 4 types of the AI recently. The first one is the perception AI. The second one is the generative AI. And the third one is the agentic AI. And the last one is the physical AI. The foundation geospatial model is the core of the generative AI and also the agentic AI. That means we already have the very generous knowledge from the lot of the ChatGPT or the sort of AI agent models. But we have to describe the geospatial data with the very specific mission-driven language, not just the general one. So that kind of the data and the foundation model should be utilized as the engine or the core of the generative geospatial model and also agentic AI for the geospatial mission. So that kind of the data set is really important. And also it can be utilized for 5 unique functionality. First one is the self-organizations and the self-generating and self-reasoning and also self-verifying and self-growing. That means they can enhance their capability by themselves to understanding and to adapt daily and weekly captured worldwide imagery. And this functionality can be used for defense, also intelligence customer, and also very specific functionality. It is one of subset of the artificial general intelligence. So it is the core of the artificial geospatial intelligence. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Moving forward with Don Polaski, who is the VP of Booz Allen. Don, what do you think about the enterprise? Like we started from the creative ways of using the AI to the platform to the specific solutions to the enterprise. So where do you see AI as an enterprise?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I will. Pat Bilchin was mentioned. I'll note I get to work with Dr. Bilchin every day. We are working on Pat GPT, so to Abe's point, soon you'll all have your own little pocket Pat Bilchin that can help you reason through problems. But when we think about geospatial AI at the enterprise, it's interesting. I don't know that I've ever seen a technology so quickly adopted in the government space. I think ChatGPT and models like Meta or Anthropic's Claude, they're so approachable. They're so easy to jump into, and you could ask a question, and you could immediately see the result. And so there's so much energy behind this technology, and I think what I've seen over the past couple of years is there have been a lot of pilots, a lot of prototypes, a lot of proofs of concept. And I think of those as little petri dishes, right? Everything's moving so fast, so the pilot that you built 6 months ago is going to use different technologies than the one you would build today. But we're starting to see proven results. We're starting to see adoption of this technology. And so we need to start thinking about how do we actually handle this at the enterprise level? And so, because what you don't want is to have 20 different, generative AI systems out there, and they can't communicate, and they don't share data, and you run into this kind of like siloed problem that a lot of agencies have. And so as we think about the enterprise, we really need to start thinking about what standards do we need to impose in order to make sure these systems can kind of like interoperate and communicate. So I think I think back to OGC and standardization around like WFS and WMS interfaces. That allows data sources to connect into geospatial applications, and the application doesn't need to know anything about the underlying data. As long as you could leverage that agreed upon protocol, you could interoperate. And so I look at things like Anthropic just released their model context protocol. This is a standard messaging format that will allow models to communicate with data sources in agentic architectures. I think we really need to be looking at standards like that, or other standards, right? Thinking, working with OGC, to really figure out, okay, how do we make sure these systems can interoperate, but how do we do it in such a way that it doesn't centralize everything so we could still kind of maintain that innovation that we've seen in the first couple of years of this technology?
Well, thanks, Don. That was cool. Like we started from innovation and ended with enterprise. In our second round, I want to just bring up, recently in a Congress, the former CEO of Google made a statement that most of the energy, the AI will be the largest consumer of the energy of the world tomorrow. And we have not yet seen the beginning of AI. So, Abe, you have worked with Google and you are one of the champions of AI. What do you think about how near and real we are in the field of AI?
Yeah, so our previous speaker from OpenAI, I think, gave some great examples of rapid transformation. I think all of us need to realize that the underlying technologies to AI, they're advancing at a rate that's different than we're used to. So it's not a simple linear improvement where it gets 10% better each year, but the underlying hardware and the underlying software combined with additional data is actually causing an improvement, if we have math nerds in the audience, at a quadratic or potentially exponential scale. So I think what that means is by 2027, less than 2 years away, we're going to have AI that is profoundly more than twice as impactful as the AI that we have today.
So it's a kind of 100x growth almost every year?
Don't quote me on 100, but certainly more than twice as good in 2 years.
Okay. Don brought up the issue of architecture and standards as kind of enabler of the real enterprise AI. And Nadine has been someone who was the CEO of OGC for 5-6 years, and then she has been in this field for long. So Nadine, what do you think that how these standards or governance or architecture is going to really make this Earth Copilot, which you're talking about at the enterprise level, a function?
Yeah, well, thank you, Don, for bringing this up. You stole my punch line at the end. It's like, we need standards. But So I think to me, before we get to standards, what we're watching is a whole ecosystem developing, right? We were talking about the knowledge infrastructure. So the ecosystem is changing, and if you really want to see it, you have to go to the exhibit hall, because they are literally companies you've never heard of before that are doing real things with, I'm focusing on the GeoAI. And I know in the opening, plenary, Rhonda and Robert showed, for example, Dante.ai. This is not a huge company. This is a small company. LuxCarta is another small company in France, and they're doing AI-powered 3D mapping, and they can generate customizable data sets for you, geospatial data sets, right? You look at SparkGeo, a Canadian company, and in this case, they're using the geospatial and policy documents to create, biodiversity assessments. So what we're seeing is the bubbling up of all these new players, and when we then look at the new puzzle, we'll have to define the reference architecture of this new world and where these pieces intersect between or come together, right? Connect between the platforms that are there, the foundation models, and then the little pieces of the puzzle on top of which the applications will be developed. So I think we're witnessing ecosystem, which is going to lead to a whole new generation.
I'm sorry to just disturb you, but you just talked about ecosystem.
Yeah.
And St. Louis is known to be developing a kind of ecosystem. How do you think that St. Louis as a destination is trying to build that ecosystem for GeoInt?
How do we, sorry?
Think that St. Louis as a destination is developing the kind of GeoInt ecosystem?
I think it's, I think what I'm seeing, right, is a lot of interest in geospatial from non-geospatial, right?
Wonderful.
So we're attracting the traditionally non-geospatial into the geospatial ecosystem that's reflected literally everywhere we go.
So taking that forward on the ecosystem, what do you think about connecting geospatial and space? You are a space company, and you talked about geospatial foundation models. So how AI is powering your business to deliver better solutions to your customers?
Yeah, for perspective view of the system, so a lot of systems nowadays underlying, they have their own AI model. So that purpose, if we have those kind of the MCP, we have the common protocol, and we simply connect all the different and independent system, and we can expand the ecosystem. That means if we have the orbit planning and the camera tasking, and also ground the system with the AI model, and also the analyst with the AI model. If some full cycle of the process using shared their common protocol, three different systems work as the one team, not just the operating by the humans. So as perspective of view of that, the kind of the standardization is really important.
So Don, anything which has to do with GeoInt has to be tactical. So AI enterprise, how would it bring tactical advantage to the organizations?
Yeah. So, and you mentioned space as well, right? And so, when we think about space, when we think about the warfighter, when we think about disaster response, a lot of times we have to think about swap constraints, right? Size, weight, and power. And this round of questioning started with energy, right? So it's like, okay, you've got these massive models, which are much bigger than your traditional like deep learning, convolutional neural net, computer vision models. And so we need to find out a way, we need to figure out how do we take these massive models and actually make them useful at the tactical edge. Because if you're doing a disaster response, for instance, you might not have the luxury of having a high bandwidth internet, right? Or a HPC supercomputer sitting in your backyard where you can deploy the models. And so what we have found is that getting those foundation models, working with companies like OpenAI or Anthropic or AWS, that's kind of step one in the process. But oftentimes, as we think about addressing these use cases that are at the tactical edge, we need to be figuring out, okay, we've got the model. what are our swap constraints? What are we actually able to deploy this to? And then, do we have to fine tune the model for the particular use case? And so an example that I'll give that my team recently delivered was actually in partnership with NASA. And so we took Llama 3.2, which was a Gen AI model produced by Meta, and we work with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise to take that model and actually kind of like fine-tune it and refine it for the specific target HPE hardware in the space station. And so we were able to take that model, work with Meta as the model provider, work with HP as the infrastructure provider, and then kind of bring in our own mission expertise to deploy a model to the space station, which is like as far from an edge perspective as you could possibly get, right? And so I think what that shows is that by kind of like making sure that you have these partnerships, kind of across the space, and you really understand the underlying infrastructure, that's how you take this technology and get it out of the the cloud and actually get it into the hands of the warfighter or the first responder.
So anything which is tactical has to be trusted. Like, trust is the base for any kind of tactical thinking. So, what do you think about the trust and the transparency kind of issues associated with AI? How far we are to kind of trust it?
Yeah, we're in an early stage, Sanjay. So one of my favorite American philosophers is a guy named Tracy Morrow. He also used to be a hip-hop artist named Ice-T. And when asked, how can you tell the difference between a hip-hop artist and someone just gets on stage and rhymes, he had a really profound answer, which is, game knows game, baby. And by that, of course, he meant if you have tacit expert knowledge in anything, you're capable of recognizing it. And for a long time, we've had, as a community, just sort of a tacit knowledge model where we go to experts, but we don't necessarily ask them to show their work. I think one thing that is really exciting to me about AI as a thought partner, not always doing the thinking for us, but thinking with us, is the last speaker, Katrina from OpenAI, showed this new method of chain of thought, where as we're involved in teamwork with an AI, we can have it show its work, show its assumptions, and also cite the information that it's using in the outputs that it's presenting to us. So I think this can actually open up a new form of transparency that we haven't had as a community.
So transparency and privacy are the two important challenges which are associated with AI and how much information I want to share. So Nadine, how do you see the trust, transparency, and privacy kind of being an enabler or a challenge for the AI in future?
So I think, I don't know, they're both, enablers and a challenge. But what I've heard, again, this is from the technical perspective, is that this community, and back to like the geospatial intersection with AI, this community is doing what we call the boring work behind the scenes to ensure that the data is trusted. I mean, you need to calibrate it. I mean, we have to do all the basics for geospatial data so that we're preparing it for analytics, and now by those who are not intimate with it. So there's all this work that we need to put in terms of metrics, right? Benchmarks, so that we can trust what we're getting out. I mean, we keep talking about the black box versus the totally transparent box.
Do you see any challenges in terms of the transparency and trust of AI? Anyone want to add on this before I move to the next topic?
Yeah, to make the data set for the AI models. So transparency for the data set is also important. That means if we have the lack of the data, we use the synthetic data. That means that is not the real data. And also, the real satellite data comes from the specific satellite and orbit area. And we have to describe what types of the satellite imagery we use and we consumed for this mission. And the other thing is come from the fake or the synthetic data. So we have to describe what is our
authenticity of data is something which is very important.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that into enterprise level of application, John, when you have a lot of data coming from different sources to make it enterprise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a difficult challenge, right? And it's going to depend on a data set by data set basis. And so I think enterprises need to be thinking about a couple of things. I think the first is, there's a practice called ML Ops, right, or AI Ops. This is, the set of processes, procedures, and tools that you use to monitor your incoming data, monitor your models, make sure they're performing in the way that you expect. And then the other thing that I'll add is that when we start to think about more complex architectures, like agentic AI, was mentioned previously, these systems are unique in the sense that they are able to come up with dynamic workflows on the fly, right? So when when you have a bunch of microservices, you kind of know this service is going to call this service is going to call this service. With agentic AI, where you have these models reasoning, they're going to be coming up with their own workflows. And so we need to think about getting the instrumentation in place to collect the logs on that, understand how these queries are bouncing around your agents, and make sure that there's a robust practice for analyzing that so that you're looking at security, you're looking at cost, you're looking at bottlenecks in the system. And as we are engineering those systems, we just need to keep that in mind to make sure that they're not running all over the place and we don't have the telemetry to actually understand what they're doing.
So that's still a very complex environment. I enter into the last 4 minutes of the last session, last round of the conversation, and that's about human intelligence. So we're all talking about artificial intelligence, human intelligence. So is it artificial intelligence I'm 50s, so I come from the last generation, I guess. And there is a next generation AI we are talking about. So we have started with human intelligence, and we are using probably in limited way artificial intelligence, but the next generation begins with AI, and probably I don't know how much they will use. So where is the line where humans will augment AI or AI will augment humans? I start with Ab.
Okay.
Expert.
Yeah, thanks, Sanjay. So obviously, we do have some digital natives who will grow up with AI always being available. And I think that dividing line is kind of fuzzy, but a recommendation I have for people who are already professionals who've been growing up without AI is a great book called The AI-Driven Leader by Jeff Woods, who provides many examples of ways that all of us can incorporate AI as a thought partner, both in our personal lives and in our work. And obviously in national security, this is an emerging area. Many things are not appropriate in national security to put into a public tool, but I think AI is not going to replace humans, but it's pretty obvious to me today that it is a competitiveness issue in national security, and humans plus AI absolutely will replace humans without AI.
So humans plus AI is the message from Abe. So what do you think about Nadine? Humans plus plus?
Humans plus plus. So I will say, because Abe said it all, I would say humans, at, again, this point in time, we need to collaborate. We're setting the foundation here. We need to collaborate on this ecosystem. We need to collaborate on the metrics, on the benchmarks, on the standards, and on opening the best practices so that eventually, even when it's AI and human, we're not being misled by the AI, but actually genuinely supported.
Taegyun, what's your take on human plus plus AI or AI plus plus human?
It's really difficult to answer, but AI can be helpful for every human process, but the previous process cannot be changed. But who has the AI rich guy or the AI poor guy, who has the lot of recipe too complex for their mission and for their process? I think it's hard to describe that things, but AI poor guy or the AI rich guy, not the AI plus plus. Yeah.
John, what's your take?
Yeah, I live on a spectrum with this question, right? So I'm like, this will be like a slightly better version of Google, right? I think we're probably, and then on the far side of the spectrum, I think, AI, this might fundamentally change what it means to be human, right? And so I think we'll probably net out somewhere in between, but I think it's hard to prognosticate. I will say that in having conversations about adopting AI and kind of the change management required with that, I hear a lot about like, oh, how are we going to get the existing workforce to adopt these tools, right? They didn't grow up with them. This is going to be a big challenge. I think the bigger challenge is these AI, the younger folks that are coming in who have grown up with algorithms and AI, and they trust these systems implicitly. As the workforce continues to age or retire, how do we make sure that the new folks coming in know when to call the bluff of the AI, right? And so that they're just not sitting there and accepting what's coming back to them at face value. And I think that's going to be really interesting to navigate in the next couple of years.
Well, thank you very much. Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. In my closing remarks, I'd just like to say that AI is real. It's already here. I remember in 2016, we did a conference, Geospatial World Forum, with the theme Deep Learning. And everybody felt that I'm using something which is like a bizarre or maybe just a kind of fun word. And last year, I did a theme known as spatial computing. And then now the World Economic Forum has come up with a report on spatial computing. So AI is real. It's getting better as we start using it, because the process of learning for AI is actually, while we are using it, it's getting better and better and better. To the extent we can develop more governance models around it, to the extent we can kind of be more conscious and concerned about or respect about the ethics. Those are the challenges which we'll face as a world, but AI is already there. Every nation is building sovereign AI. We didn't have time to talk about that, but every nation is building sovereign AI. There are billions and billions and billions of dollars of investment into developing sovereign AI capabilities around the world. And some of these big deep tech companies are big partners of the nations. And I think geospatial and space industry, for us, it's a kind of very valuable tool. It is making democratization of the geospatial capabilities. It is making utilization of the geospatial capabilities in almost every way of our living. So with this, I would like to end and conclude this session. And once again, thanks Rhonda, USGIF, and the team for inviting us, and thanks to the panelists.